Now, most importantly, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Sharlot Hall Museum's Executive Director, Dr. Stuart Rosebrook. Quick little introduction on Stuart. He began his tenure with the museum on July 1st of last year, after 11 years with True West magazine. He is a professional historian, editor, and writer with close to 4 decades of experience in journalism, publishing, and nonprofit organizations. Rosebrook holds both a master's and Ph.D. in public and Western history from Arizona State University and a bachelor's in history from Wake Forest University. A noted scholar on the popular culture of the American West, he grew up in the film and television industry and has been researching and writing about Western films since high school. He is a member of the Prescott Chorale of Westerners and serves on the board of directors for the Prescott Western Heritage Foundation and the Prescott Frontier Days Foundation. Stuart and his wife, Dr. Julie Rosebrook, who is a psychologist at the Prescott VA, reside in Yavapai Hills here in Prescott. So again, please join me in welcoming Mr. Stuart Rosebrook.
Bailey, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and I want to thank every single one of you for taking time out today to come here to the museum for a presentation today on the Wild Wild Western. Bailey said, I'm Stuart Rosebrook. I'm the executive director here at Sharlot Hall Museum. Today we're going to have a very good conversation about filmmaking in Arizona, its history, its heritage, its cultural importance to Prescott, the state, the national industry, and the popular culture of the Western around the world. You might ask, why start with the opening of Junior Bonner? Well, there's a variety of reasons, and I was asked by a reporter earlier this week why I was interested in this topic and why I formulated this idea to talk about the Wild Wild Western and the legacy of the summer of '71 and filmmaking in Arizona, especially filmmaking in Prescott and Prescott's role, not only in filmmaking in Prescott, but filmmaking on the Western around the world. As you may have noticed, I heard some good chuckles. There was subtitles in Korean on that print. I just recently bought that copy of Junior Bonner. I'm always searching for posters and copies of the film. And I played that with the Korean subtitles to make a point. I also chose the opening of the film because of its ties to the history and heritage, filmmaking, and its beginnings, and the influence of the men and women who were filmmakers here over 110 years ago. The fact of the matter that a film made here in Prescott, Arizona in 1971, released in 1972, has gone around the world and is now released with Korean subtitles, tells you the power of this medium, this very American medium of the Western. Not just the medium of film, but also of literature, of novels, Western history, photography, our culture, our artisans, the artisanship that we celebrate here during the Prescott Indian Art Market, the Western culture that we live and celebrate and promote and teach here at Sharlot Hall Museum. So why Junior Bonner? Well, the reporter asked me that. It's very close to my heart. This is the film that launched my father's career. He actually had the audacity to come home in 1967 to my mother with 2 children at home and a mortgage and said, I've quit my job at the downtown advertising firm at Foot Cone Building. I'm going to be a writer, he declared. Now, I met a young woman the other night at the PAFA, the Prescott Area Film Association, who must have been maybe 23, and she stood in front of me as she introduced herself. She said, and what do you do? She says, I am an actor, writer, director, and producer. I'm going to make films. And I looked at her and I said, good for you. I think that, I said, you know what you want to do. You were saying it. You were manifesting who you are and what you want to be. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit and the importance of the role of history and culture and Prescott really taking ownership as the center of our humanities, our culture, artists, writers, essayists, poets, filmmakers, sculptors. Prescott is the center of this. We shouldn't concede it to Sedona or Scottsdale or Tubac or Tucson. We need to own it. And you're going to hear a little bit of preaching up here today about filmmaking as well as history and heritage. So Junior Bonner, filmed in 1971, remains. It is a bouquet to the people of Prescott, and the Prescott made it so. The picture, and we'll talk about this a little earlier, made just before Junior Bonner was Billy Jack. Now, Billy Jack is a great cult film, and Junior Bonner has a cult following too. I think Billy Jack may have made more money at the box office than Junior Bonner. It was one of those cult films like Easy Rider. People went out and counterculture and etc. And people will remember it for its locations around Prescott. The same man, Bill Pierce, who's was one of the leaders of Prescott in the 1960s and early 70s, and is in his early 90s, lives here in the Dewey-Humboldt area. Bill Pierce was the film commissioner. And I'm going to talk about the role of film commissioners and the role of Arizona in promoting itself in filmmaking today. Well, how does a movie get to Prescott, Arizona from Los Angeles, right? The whole deal in writing the film. Now, my dad had come to Prescott in 1970, was inspired to write the film, but everything in terms of the production of the script had started in Los Angeles, had gone through all of the iterations that it does in terms of signing contracts and casting. But from the beginning, Joe Wazan, Sam Peckinpah, and Steve McQueen wanted to make the movie here. Of course, my father did as well, growing up here at the Orem Ranch. So how did they make the movie here instead of Ruidoso, New Mexico? Well, it took someone like Bill Pierce, who was sent the script up from Phoenix. It had been sent from LA. ABC Pictures had sent it to the film commissioner, came to Bill. Bill had already done all the locations for Bless the Beasts and Billy Jack. Billy Jack, though, their production company left debts. Junior Bonner didn't leave any debts. And Bill Pierce was able to take Sam Peckinpah around with Joe Wazan and his cinematographer and find all the locations to make the movie. They only paid for one location. They paid for the house that Ida Lupino's character lives in, Junior Bonner's mother. Other than that, everything was gratis, but the film company left, according to Bill, somewhere between $1.5 and $3 million here that summer, right? They left a lot of money here. The whole film crew, they hired local extras. It was a big economic impact to the community and remains to this day one of the finest films made in Prescott, and one of Steve McQueen and both Sam Peckinpah both believed it was one of their greatest films. So we're going to use that as a fulcrum in our conversations. 1971, the film was released in 72, which is exactly 50 years after the first film is produced in Prescott in 1912. Now let's work our way through how Arizona becomes such an important filmmaking location for filmmakers around the world. Most of you will recognize this is Monument Valley. This is John Ford's 1939 masterpiece, Stagecoach. Many people will rank other Western films higher on the top 10 list of Westerns than Stagecoach. But I will be here with you that in 1939, along with Gone with the Wind and along with The Wizard of Oz, Stagecoach is probably the most important Western ever made because of how it changed the A Western. It introduced Monument Valley and John Wayne to international audiences and proves to the film studios that A Westerns have a financial future. And we're going to talk about the business today also. Filmmaking is a business. If you grew up in Los Angeles, in New York or Chicago or Phoenix, you might say, what's the business of Phoenix? I say it's sales. Phoenix is a sales and tourism, right? Phoenix is a tourism city. But in Los Angeles, when you talk about the business, it's the movie making business. It's television and film. And I'd say in Phoenix, if you say you're in the business, you're in the tourism business. Claire Trevor and John Wayne, she's a big star, and John Ford takes a chance on him. He'd been languishing in B pictures, and this is his great return to Westerns. Let's step back just a little bit before that. Thomas Alva Edison and Buffalo Bill Cody had a very good friendship. And the two of them made a whole series of silent westerns, not here in Arizona, but up in different parts of the country. They had a great partnership. And the interesting thing about Buffalo Bill and Thomas Edison is they play a role in Arizona's film history. Bill Cody, the greatest showman, Western showman of all time. We really owe much of our Western popular culture to his vision and his philosophy that he was an entertainer and that people not only across the United States with his Wild West show, but around the world would enjoy his dynamic Western, his Wild West show. And he and Edison made a number of films together, and Edison filmed some of those Wild West shows and some of those films, at least parts of them, still exist today. But Thomas Edison, he felt he had control. He had the patent on, filmmaking. Because of that, one of the first great films ever made that everyone thinks about is The Great Train Robbery, 1903. No, it wasn't filmed in Montana or Arizona or Texas or California. It was filmed in New Jersey, that great seat of Western filmmaking. I'm sure that they're West people in Western New Jersey think they're Westerners versus Eastern New Jersey, but Thomas Edison had a powerful control on the early years of filmmaking, and as everyone knows, when things get a little too tied down in the early 20th century, people were still saying, "Go west, young man. Go west, young woman. Go find your future somewhere else." And the rules and the laws were a little looser the further you went west. We could talk about baseball the same way. So filmmakers started fleeing the East Coast and working their way to Chicago and Oklahoma and Texas and California. And they even started coming to Arizona, right? Now, how did they get out here? Did they drive? Well, some of them may have driven. Did they take the train? More than likely, a lot of them took the train. And the train, of course, the main railroad, two main railroads to Los Angeles, the Santa Fe Railroad and the Southern Pacific. You're on that great super chief out of Chicago where Lubin had been and Selig Polyscope. You take that railroad out of Chicago and go to Ash Fork and switch trains and come down to Prescott, Arizona. So 1912, the year we became a state, the first film was made here in Prescott, Arizona, right? The Cringer, a little one-reeler. Well, what else is happening here in Prescott at that same time? Well, Prescott's modernizing. There's even trolley cars, right? Electric trolley cars. So Prescott is seen as a modern city and has, of course, the Prescott Frontier Days Rodeo. The rodeo is attracting cowboys from across the country and around Prescott to compete. And one of them is Tom Mix. Now, what happens in Prescott, and why is the Selig Polyscope Company in Prescott, Arizona? Well, in 1910, between 1910 and 1912, in Los Angeles, maverick filmmakers are moving to Hollywood. In 1910, there was only 5,000 people. Can you believe this? Only 5,000 people in 1910 in Hollywood, the neighborhood of this farm-like community on the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains. By 1920, 35,000 people lived in Hollywood, and Paramount and Universal founded in 1912, the same time that Tom Mix was over here. So what did Selig Polyscope do with Tom Mix, and why is Tom Mix so important to Prescott? Yes, he competed in our rodeo, which was really quite amazing. But Tom Mix also, this was like the minor leagues, but at the same time, he made 65 Westerns here in the Prescott area. For Selig Polyscope, he made 236 films. By 1917, he had moved from Selig. He kept coming back and forth. He was now working for Fox. He was making $17,000 a week. not a month, not a year, $17,000 a week. Tom Mix had picked up, and this is around the same time that Buffalo Bill passes away. Paul, is about 1917? Is that the year that? 1917. The baton is passed to Tom Mix. Now, just like Sharlot Hall, and I think some of us don't realize that our greats, these people that we look up to, right? They're not living in this little vacuum. Sure, they're not walking around with a smartphone and they don't have 400 channels on their TV, but they're well read. They are following popular culture. They're readers. They're reading the newspaper. They understand, especially someone like Tom Mix. He picks up the baton from Buffalo Bill and becomes the most popular action hero. He is, John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Rocky Balboa. He's everything. He does all his own stunts. Jack London passes away around that time. He had been the most popular novelist at the time, the adventurous filmmaker. Here's the film that was recently, they recently showed this at the Elks Theater at the wonderful Prescott Film Festival. Now, we always hear stories that Tom Mix did all his own stunts. We think about Tom Cruise jumping out of airplanes. Well, there's no paved roads to the Grand Canyon, right? You have to take everything by mule or man down into the canyon. If you watch this film, he's in the river, there's airplanes, he's everywhere. And so I don't think Tom Cruise has anything on Tom Mix. If not, Tom Cruise has come back as Tom Mix. Here's a film scene. This is in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, okay? This isn't on a movie set. That backdrop is the Grand Canyon. So why is it important to make a parallel, talk about Prescott, Hollywood, Tom Mix, and Buffalo Bill, and Thomas Edison? Well, one of the main reasons is this is the era coming after World War I with the rise of the popular culture, right? It's the rise of the newspaper, grand era of the newspaper. What other grand media is growing at that time? Filmmaking and radio, right? So people are more and more connected. And Prescott, Arizona, Tom Mix is making movies that are going around the world, right? And he made 65 of them right here in Prescott, Arizona. Oh, wait a second. Is that the Dells? Okay, we're not going to get into the Dells today. But anyone who does tours about filmmaking in Prescott, the Dells is one of those locations. And Yavapai Hills, where Julie and I live, that was a ranch that was rented for Tom Mix to live on, and they made many of his movies up and down those hills of Yavapai Hills. So we know I didn't get into the pre-story in Buffalo Bill. I started with films, but we know that Buffalo Bill had dime novels and stories written about him. And he was Paul Fees and I are going to have to do something up here sometime soon on Buffalo Bill. But I think Buffalo Bill was a bit of a windy too, wasn't he, Paul? And Tom Mix was a windy. He never told the truth if he didn't have to. And if you read his obituary, almost every one of his obituaries is filled with at least 17 legends like Pecos Pete or, the great legends of the West. But he even gets his own comic book. He only gets his own comic strip. He's everywhere. And Tom Mix he goes to Europe. He puts a circus together. When the sound pictures come around in the 1930s, he's passé, right? Things have passed him by. So he puts together a circus, just like Buffalo Bill, and takes Western culture around the world and is very popular across the courts of Europe. He's there in 1939 when the war breaks out and comes back to the United States, and he makes his way to Arizona, where his fate, we will talk about a little bit later, but Where does he return to rebuild his career, where to recharge it before Los Angeles? He comes to Arizona. Now, why do I have Zane Grey and Tom Mix together? Well, the same time that Tom Mix was here in Prescott making all of those pictures, and Selig Polyscope was making 236 pictures with Tom Mix and spreading the beauty of Arizona. And then Fox came here to make pictures in the teens and 20s. They're making them here in Prescott, up in the Sedona area, the Grand Canyon, and the stories are around the world. Well, who is living in Arizona at the same time as Tom Mix? Zane Grey. Zane Grey is living over towards Payson on the Mogollon Rim. He's writing many of his novels. He's being inspired by Arizona's history, including the Pleasant Valley War, the legends of the Rim Country, the legends of the Navajo and the Hopi people, the cowboys, the cattle culture. And so right here, and remember, Payson at one point was part of Yavapai County. So right here in Arizona, we think Hollywood, right? We think New York. Right here in Arizona, these two men, Zane Grey and Tom Mix, they are two of the cornerstones, and Arizona and their communities are responsible for the creation of the popular Western culture. The Vanishing American, a novel by Zane Grey, the first film made in Monument Valley, the first great film to cast a large cast of local Native Americans. So, 1925, Zane Grey and The Vanishing American and Monument Valley. Zane Grey continues to be popular today. Millions of volumes of his novels have been sold in multiple languages around the country. 100 of his novels were adapted into either film or television in multiple versions over and over and over, including just maybe 5-6 years ago, The Riders of the Purple Sage was an opera that debuted down in Phoenix at the Orpheum Theater, which dates to this era, right? And the art background was done by Ed Mell, the late great Arizona artist and friend of Bob Bell's. John Wayne and the Big Trail, 1931. Now, one thing you have to realize is by the 1920s, there's only 7 movies made in the Prescott area. Hollywood has definitely realized, and they've built all of their sets. There's a dozen or more studios in Los Angeles, and they're very comfortable in Los Angeles making most of their films. But filmmakers who want to bring a reality to their filmmaking are not going to get stuck in the Santa Clarita Valley or the San Fernando Valley or up even in the Owens River Valley. They're going to go elsewhere. Has anyone seen this film here, The Big Trail? Anyone in here? We should screen it sometime. I put it again in the top 10 of all Westerns. Raoul Walsh was the director. Why I love this movie, and I compare it to Arizona, which was filmed in Old Tucson in 1939, is giant cast, like the early Ben-Hur, right? The big, like the great Cecil B. DeMille, big epic pictures. And it's the Depression, right? But filmmakers are trying to push the envelope. People probably remember a few years ago, Heaven's Gate was a huge failure almost killed the films, I think almost killed Paramount. And Cleopatra almost killed MGM. Well, The Big Trail, someone had said, hey, we've got this new camera idea. We'll film it with 2 different cameras, one a standard camera, and then we'll do a 3-camera shot. And then all the theaters across the country will want to show this epic Western on 3 cameras. Well, the problem was they spent a lot of money. I think they filmed in 7 states, including Arizona. They had hundreds of extras. When you watch this film, and there are scenes in this film, and Paul Fees and I have joked about this, archives of their wagon train shots that look so realistic that people are like, oh yeah, here's a wagon train going across Kansas, and it's from this movie. The Teamsters, the costumers, the men and women who acted in it, the extras that they recruited, in 1931, these are men and women who were off the ranch, off the farms. These were first generation men and women who had grown up, had come off the ranch and farm. They were Westerners, and it's a very dynamic film and a beautiful new print out there. But it killed John Wayne's career until 1939. He ended up in B movies, even trying to be a singing cowboy at one point. It lost a lot of money. And by the way, all those movie theaters across the country, the last picture shows of the little towns, there wasn't any way they could tap their and buy the new projection, the new cameras they needed to show the film. So Stagecoach. This is a really important film in American history. It introduces us, John Ford, who'd made a lot of Westerns in the teens and 20s and silent movies, was receiving a lot of great praise. I believe it already won his first Academy Award. He cast this great ensemble film. How many people here love the movie Tombstone, right? Or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance? Ensemble Westerns, like great ensemble films, The Lifeboat by Alfred Hitchcock, they can capture your heart. The filmmaking is tight. The characters are well defined, like a real play. You could do Stagecoach as a radio play. The characters, based on a novel, short story by Ernest Haycox. It was in Collier's magazine, adapted by one of John Ford's favorite screenwriters. Well cast with well-known actors and actresses, and it changes the direction of Westerns. At this point, and if you all know Jimmy Stewart, like Jimmy Stewart Westerns, in the 30s, before World War II, Jimmy Stewart, I think it was Daltrey Rides Again, Jimmy Stewart was making Western comedies. And the A Western the Western was B movies, serials. There really weren't a lot of great A Westerns yet. So Stagecoach proves to box office the business, and it introduces us to John Ford is now in love with Monument Valley and Arizona and the Four Corners, and so is John Wayne. 1939, the same year that Columbia Pictures decides, you know what, the economy's doing well enough. We've made all of these movies. Everybody has seen the same scene over and over and over again from San Fernando Valley and Santa Clarita Valley and even the Owens Valley up and along the Sierras. Let's go back to Arizona. They have a very strong memory of the importance, the filmmaking in Arizona. The train, of course, the Southern Pacific, travels from Los Angeles to Tucson. There's great hotels. And just like today in Santa Fe, remember, your A-listers, your directors, your actors, your producers, everybody likes a nice, sunshiny spring location away from Los Angeles. It's a vacation and a break from LA, as well as the weather is great and cooperates. And what about the background? The beautiful background of the Saguaro National Monument. It's now a park. And Old Tucson is established before the war, same year as Monument Valley as a film location here in Arizona. What's happening in Prescott? Well, in the 1930s, to chart tourism in Arizona during the 1930s, Arizona suffers a great deal in its tourism dollars. The numbers will present themselves as it's a very tough time for the state. There's a recession in the mining industry, the farming industry, and tourism. Only 11 movies are made in the 1930s here in Prescott. But what happens in the 1940s as we get just before the war, when filmmakers see the success of, hey, the talk of the town, Monument Valley, Tucson. Tex Ritter is married to Dorothy Fay, a Prescott native. They come back, they make this film here, Arizona Frontier, in the Prescott area. And so in the 1940s, despite the war, not many during the war, but after the war, 30 films are made in the Prescott area. Gene Autry comes back from the war, the flying sergeant. He realizes that he's no longer with Republic Pictures, and he comes to Arizona in Yavapai County and films The Strawberry Roan in 1948. The Lone Ranger is made here in 1956, and so we see popular culture and filmmakers and television, early television, come to Prescott. Now, what about Roy Rogers? I did a little research on this, and anyone who's grown up with, is a fan of some of those early B-movie and serial and radio heroes who became then, after World War II, both television and film stars. Roy Rogers actually never made a movie in Arizona, but I put him up there because he's part of, you have to give credit to Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, the Lone Ranger, in the same breath, Hopalong Cassidy, at the post-World War II resurgence in popularity of the Western culture and filmmaking in Arizona. 1946, My Darling Clementine. If you haven't seen it, Tom Ross and Bob Bell were here for our art show, and Tom Ross will tell you straight up, it's his favorite OK Corral Western. He likes it better than Tombstone or Wyatt Earp or The Shootout at OK Corral. And he loves it not because it's the true story, but it's so dramatic and the characters are so well defined. And it's the only film that John Ford made entirely in Monument Valley. The town he built, he gave to the Navajo people. They called it Fordville. And there was a cowboy here from Cornville who had years and years, Bob Cook had a training post up on the Navajo reservation. He said that Ford would give him, thousands of dollars every year to buy clothes for the Navajo families that helped on the movies. There's Henry Fonda. The Searchers. The Searchers today is still bandied about as maybe one of the most important Westerns ever made. It should be seen on a screen 10 times this size. It's a brilliant film by John Ford. It has its flaws, but as part of the era in which he made his series of cowboy pictures, The Searchers was his pinnacle of his Westerns. And again, following in the footsteps, you put John Ford and John Wayne following in the footsteps of Gene Autry, Tom Mix, Buffalo Bill, bringing the West around the world. The Gouldings, anyone here stayed at Gouldings Lodge up in Monument Valley? I highly recommend it if you want to take a little vacation up to the Four Corners country. The Navajos have a beautiful hotel called The View, but Gouldings, I really recommend. It's where the Ford company always stayed, or at least portion. The rest of them were in tents. But Gouldings is a really magical place up there. And the Gouldings themselves, they were desperate. They had this little lodge way up there, and there was dirt roads forever to get there. And Vanishing American had been filmed there, but they were desperate to get people to the Four Corners. So they actually went to Hollywood and sat at Warner Brothers until John Ford would look at their photographs of their lodge and what they could see there in Monument Valley. And that's how John Ford got to Monument Valley. Old Tucson. So by the 1950s, filmmaking has returned to Yavapai County and Prescott. There's 21 films made in the 1950s, but what's important to really realize is that what's some of the big transitions that happened in America in the 1950s, right? We're moving from highways to interstates, railroads to airplane traffic. The tastes of Americans are changing in that era. Of course, the 1950s and the 1960s is the height of the Western on television and film, but also locations, right? Where can the stars stay? Over a certain time period, if you knew you were going to go with John Ford, you'd put up living in a tent for part of the summer. But Hollywood stars and Hollywood producers and directors and actors, they like great places to stay. Now, Tucson, right? Tucson's not only on the Southern Pacific Railroad. So when they made 310 to Yuma, they talk about taking the train from Los Angeles, not flying. They get the whole crew, all their equipment that they need in addition to what's there already in Old Tucson. But Old Tucson's ready to go, and you've got sunshine and the cooler temperatures from basically October to April. And so it's really a great location. Monument Valley takes more work, but in the 1950s and 60s, locations like Prescott begin to fade. And Sedona, though, will rise, and there's a reason for that. Jimmy Stewart made a series of pictures with Anthony Mann, a series of Westerns, including Winchester 73. If you don't know it, he was a highly decorated B-17 pilot in Europe. And when he came back from the war, he told the studios, I am not making any more comedies. I am not in the mood. And it really wasn't until the 1960s where he made some comedies again. And so if you watch his Westerns with Anthony Mann, they're very serious. His character is very somber in many of his pictures, and they're worth watching, and they really use the landscape like Ansel Adams did down there. The Anthony Mann pictures filmed in Tucson are brilliant. Howard Hawks goes to southern Arizona and makes Red River. Arizona's open for business after World War II, right? Arizona is booming with new residents, new population, and boosterism is alive and well with baseball and movie making, and everyone's building hotels. Everyone, the people, the interstates, and of course Route 66. People are traveling after the war. They're coming here, and they're coming to visit many of those places they saw in those Western films. And you cannot turn the channel on TV or go to the movies and not see a Western. And hundreds of them are being made in Tucson, right? And of course, John Ford's pictures are celebrating Monument Valley. It brings people by the thousands to Arizona to discover where they made those Western movies. Red River's down there towards, this was filmed down towards Elgin and the Mustang Hills, and Oklahoma follows Red River. Oklahoma is filmed. They go to Oklahoma, look at locations, like, no, not good enough. We need something better that's more Western. So I was reading today that that scene where he's riding through the cornfields in Oklahoma is down near Amato, and I know for a fact that they grew the corn in number 10 cans, and so they grew the corn to the height they wanted, and they grew it to the height that his horse could go through it at the right height. Gunfight at OK Corral. This picture is filmed in Old Tucson, and this is really when Tombstone. There had been some Billy the Kid, and there had been some wider pictures made before this, The Lawman, but this film, if there's one, if you looked at this picture here, Davy Crockett by Walt Disney, King of the Frontier, then The Alamo with John Wayne. There are certain films that anchor themselves as cultural touchstones that change our culture and embed themselves in the minds of not only America but around the world. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I think it's probably 10 years ago. I came home one night from the library with a DVD, a documentary on Muscle Shoals, the music studio in Alabama. And I showed it to Julie and the kids, and we were just fascinated by this place. I said, well, we're going to Florida, to your brother's house for spring break. Let's drive back through Muscle Shoals, and we'll go to the music studio. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, we got to meet Rick Hall, the movie studios. It was magical. But afterwards, we were driving out of town. I said, no, wait a second. We got to turn back around. Remember that barbecue place we saw? I think it was called OK Corral Barbecue. It looked like a Western storefront from a movie. We drove back. The kids are like, what are we doing, Dad? I'm like, oh, be patient. We drive through. I introduced myself. I start the founder's wife, who's probably at that time 80, came to the window. I told her our story, why we were there, and I said, and how is there in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, an OK Corral barbecue? And the barbecue was incredible. So was the banana cream pie and 7 other dishes. She said, oh, you're traveling. Here's some more. Here's some toys for the kids. Have fun. Her husband's favorite movie of all time, Gunfight at OK Corral. So he had to name his barbecue place in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which probably Aretha Franklin and Greg Allman and the Rolling Stones had barbecue there. I love that. Probably need to get Bob Bosbell to paint that, don't you think? Rio Bravo. The glorious color of our beautiful Arizona. Why wouldn't filmmakers come to Arizona to make movies, right? What? I mean, nobody could imagine that. I think, Nikita Khrushchev accused Arizona highways of being fake, right? Fake news. He said, no, there's no place in the world that beautiful with those kind of beautiful sunsets. Well, filmmakers from Los Angeles knew that, and so did those filmmakers that came here in 1912, right? And that's one reason why did Buffalo Bill was so inspired. He knew the beauty and the culture and the diversity of what makes the American West such a creative palette, it's magical, right? Like Camelot, it is the West in all its flaws and all its beauty, it's our Camelot. And the cowboys are the knights of the West. Jack Schaefer's Monty Walsh. You might like Tom Selleck's version better. I will tell you, go home, watch Monty Walsh. Good friend of mine's Todd Roberts' father, Bobby Roberts, was the producer. I know that Kurt Russell had to have been inspired, and his production team that made Tombstone and Disney had to have watched Monty Walsh because the lighting in the film, and I know this is a black and white film, the lighting in the film captures the lighting you'll see in the best Charles Russell and Frederick Remington paintings. Never underestimate where filmmakers find their inspiration. Rio Lobos filmed in Old Tucson. Now Phoenix has one of the great rodeos for decades until it closes in the 80s, the rodeo of rodeos, and they come to Phoenix to make The Lusty Men and Bus Stop, two big rodeo pictures. Little anecdote, Don Murray, who is the star with the Marilyn Monroe and Bus Stop, later on his son, Chris Murray, goes to Orm School, graduates from there in 1974, and his mother, Hope Lang, the actress, is the commencement speaker at Orm School in 1974. Sedona, let's talk about beautiful palettes. Sedona captures the imagination of filmmakers before and after World War II. Actually, John Wayne, one of his first Westerns after Stagecoach, The Angel and the Bad Men, is filmed in Sedona. And if you ever talk to Sally Jackson, she can tell you all about where that ditch is and who land that was on, because it's a water war story like you see in a lot of Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and Lone Ranger pictures. But Sedona, again, think about the popularity of Western culture, the popularity of filmmaking in Arizona, and tourism. Even to this day, tourism is the number one industry in Arizona. Who knows if all these new AI places and computer chip places outpace tourism, but most recently, 19 billion gross a year on tourism in Arizona, right? And filmmaking played a major role in that. The Rounders, the adaptation of a novel written by a good friend of our family's, Max Evans, one of the greatest Western writers of the 20th century. And then 310 to Yuma. I love 310 to Yuma. Again, I like it over the remake. One reason I love it is you can see so many places in Arizona that were popular locations for filmmaking. Dragoon Springs, Texas Canyon, Old Tucson, and Sedona, Bradshaw Ranch. Now, everyone who goes to Sedona today and you get off 179 and you drive in through Oak Creek Village, and if it breaks your heart, it breaks mine, because that whole viewscape has disappeared, right? Now, I'm not against capitalism. All those great folks are making a lot of money and supporting our tourism industry, but the Bradshaw Ranch is not there anymore because we've got Oak Creek Village. And so if filmmaking has dropped in the Sedona area, one reason is, and it's moved to Santa Fe, it's because we don't have a major airport in Sedona. We don't have as many great locations that are easy for filmmakers to use. And remember, it's a business. Keep going back, and we'll talk about the business here towards the end of my presentation. How the West was won. I had a grand surprise doing research on this. If you read my article in days past a couple weeks ago, I featured some information on how the West was won. This is like the Alamo and the gunfight at OK Corral. Does anyone here remember when it first came out? Did you see it on first run or did you see it on second run? It's one of those pictures. It was designed for the Cinerama Dome, for the biggest screen possible, right? It's an incredible art form. Remember the big trail, 3 cameras, right? Bride screen. This is one of those great success stories. Nominated for 8 Academy Awards, it won an Academy Award. maybe the most award-winning film made in, or at least Western, made in Yavapai County. This is Perkinsville on the backside of Mangus Mountain. What I love is the audacity of these filmmakers who obviously, just like when Bill Pierce came here, someone called the local location manager and said, we're looking for a place where we can film a railroad scene. What do you got? We need a river. We need a mountain. What do you have? And he said, oh, well, if you don't mind going down a 12-mile dirt road, we've got a great location along the Verde River. And they turned in Perkinsville into the location. And our very own George Fuller, our former curator, he said he remembers it very vividly, going up there and seeing they left the set there. But I also put this Life magazine cover up here because when we have discussions today in 2025 about the importance of filmmaking and television making and streaming in Arizona, should we have tax credits, not have tax credits? Why should we support the film industry? Why should we? Life magazine, How the West Was Won, Prescott, Arizona, Yavapai County. That film company came here and stayed here and spent a lot of money here, right? They brought jobs and income to Prescott. And when you have filmmaking year-round in a community, that's another cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching in the hotels and the restaurants. And guess what? Those hotel rates, they support the museums, right? We get support from the city of Prescott through tourism dollars. So does Western Heritage Center, so does the FIPPIN, so does the Museum of Indigenous People. It's a natural cycle. It's part of our tourism industry. Here's another shot from How the West Was Won. Bless the Beasts and Children and Gumball Rally, two other films that Bill Pierce was involved in the locations. Billy Jack had a great cultural impact, remains a cult following. I like to tell people when I was a kid, I've been to the ice cream shop where Billy Jack kicks the guy through the window. It's now known, I think, as Mob Burgers. It was Kendall's Ice Cream for a really long time. 1971, Steve McQueen needs, again, it's interesting, many filmmakers would come back to Arizona to reinvent themselves, also to rehabilitate themselves. Clark Gable went to Tucson after Carol Lombard died in the plane accident. Clark Gable became a friend with Barry Goldwater, and he was friends with Fred McMurray. And they actually, Barry Goldwater and Clark Gable and Fred McMurray, they shared some same politics and realized that war clouds were coming, and they helped build Thunderbird Field. Steve McQueen found Prescott. It's my father in the wild cow milking. Sam Peckinpah challenged him. He said, I heard you rodeo. Let's see if you can muster the wild cow milking. Robert Preston and Steve McQueen. This is a scene filmed at our train station, and maybe one of the more powerful scenes in the film. The Electric Horseman. The reason Junior Bonner got made, or was actually written from the beginning, was Robert Redford in the summer of 1970 put notice out to all the studios and agencies that he wanted to make a rodeo picture. That's when my father got a call from his agent and said, Jeb, if anyone's got a rodeo story, it's you. And he'd actually written one that summer after coming to the rodeo here in Prescott on July 4th, 1970. Well, there was 4 other Western rodeo pictures made that summer, but Robert Redford didn't make his until 1979. But outtakes, if you watch The Electric Horseman, you'll see that the outtakes for his competing in the rodeo are outtakes from Junior Bonner, filmed in 1971 at our rodeo. You have to credit Clint Eastwood almost single-handedly after in the mid-1970s when the Western has almost disappeared completely from primetime television. It's just in reruns. Rocky and The French Connection and The Godfather and soon Jaws and Star Wars All those kinds of pictures are dominating filmmaking. But Clint Eastwood comes to Arizona, the Four Corners, and he films quite a bit of his locations up there. And in many ways, this is the most important Western, big epic Western of the 70s that keeps the Western alive going into the 80s, which is a real desert of Westerns. Lonesome Dove, not filmed in Arizona, but Larry McMurtry probably wrote much of this novel at his other famous place, favorite place to write, the Arizona Inn, also where Clark Gable liked to hang out. My wife's younger brother, Mike Eads at U of A, would make extra money at the job working at the Arizona Inn, and Larry McMurtry would show up with two bags. One, a small bag with his clothes, and his other, his typewriter. And he traveled everywhere with his typewriter. But Lonesome Dove, the novel of 85, it's released in 89 on television. Tombstone in 1993. These help revive the popularity of Western culture and travel and tourism in Arizona. Tombstone filmed entirely in Arizona. Right? I can't say that for Gunfight at the OK Corral. They filmed probably most of it here, probably filmed some of it on the back lot back in Los Angeles. But Tombstone and Lonesome Dove, hand in hand, help revive the popularity of Western culture, popular Western culture, and filmmaking in Arizona. The Quick and the Dead, filmed after, not too long after Tombstone is made. It's one of the last Westerns made before Old Tucson burns. Probably one of the most tragic moments in filmmaking history in Arizona. Since Old Tucson burned, including their sound stages, some of it was saved, some of it was rebuilt, but that sound stage has never been replaced. And filmmaking in Arizona has never been the same. And the great thing is, if you mark in the 1990s and 2000s, Steven Spielberg is one of the great directors, and many other directors are like, I want to make a film at Old Tucson. I want to make a movie in Monument Valley. What they want them to say is, I want to make a movie in Prescott, Arizona. I want to make a movie in Sedona. We want them to come back to Arizona. It's really important to our economy. But again, why wouldn't you want to go to Tucson for that incredible backdrop? Young Guns 3. Are we going to have a Young Guns 3? They're talking about it. If they do, I'm sure they're going to come back to Old Tucson. Young Guns 2. Back to the Future 3. Right? Steven Spielberg, you got to go to Monument Valley. It's an icon of America. The Lone Ranger. Awful picture. I remember my dad was so excited. He was visiting my mom in Iowa City, and our kids were raised on the Lone Ranger. We're like, oh, we got to see the new big Lone Ranger picture. Just go back and watch the Clayton Moore picture. So it's a bomb. Johnny Depp is not Tano, okay? Only Jay Silverheels. Sorry. And the hero is the Lone Ranger. It's not Johnny Depp. Go back to your pirate movies. Wishman. You know what? Wishman, to me, is one of the most important movies made in Arizona in the last 20 years. And to me, it represents why Junior Bonner is still a local favorite. It represents what Prescott is best at, and that is embracing a group of creative men and women, embracing something that has lasting power, that's reflective of its community, and it also reflects how a community came together and shared its locations and supported the filmmakers for this very special story of Frank Jankowitz and Wishman. I think we need to point to Wishman as an important point in our filmmaking history. I know Gary Sachs is here, and John Krizik, and there's probably other members of our audience today who are involved with the Prescott Area Filmmakers Alliance. Once Arizona had reestablished its film credits, people here in Prescott, and we have remained a creative, culturally aware community trying to bring our story to America through Yavapai Magazine, through Out West when Charlotte Hall was writing for them, through Arizona highways, through George Fippin's art, through our sculpture, through the rodeo, through so many different avenues. Our writers, our filmmakers, our artists, our journalists continue to try to bring the story of Arizona to the world through their art form. And right now we have a chance to bring filmmaking back in Arizona. This is Tom Mix just before he died in 1940. It was a huge loss to the state and to the filmmaking. He died in a tragic accident outside of Tucson as he went there to meet with some friends, and he had ideas on rebuilding his film career in 1940. Zane Grey remains one of the most cornerstones of Western popular culture. Right now, the Western novel, though, is on the ropes. There's only 2 national companies still publishing the Westerns, and the mass market there's no more mass market Westerns being printed. So Grey is still out. If you haven't been to the Zane Grey Museum, they're kinfolk to us. Please visit the Zane Grey Museum in Payson and realize that Zane Grey and Tom Mix, they were the Pied Pipers of the West and helped take it around the world, following in the footsteps of Buffalo Bill. John Wayne fell in love with Arizona in 1939. Probably in 31 when he was here with the Big Trail, but he too was a Pied Piper of filmmaking in Arizona, along with his mentor, John Ford. Sedona, Arizona, again, a cornerstone of filmmaking history in Arizona. And the old Tucson studios. Since 2000, there's been over 100 small pictures, small and large, made in the Tucson, southern Arizona area. It remains our most active filmmaking region of the state. But there's filmed at Old Tombstone, Old Tucson. The Palace here in Junior Bonner. The Wishman used the Palace gratis, just like the Palace the Dunbar family allowed, Shel Dunbar allowed Junior Bonner to film in the Palace. And why is it important that we have filmmaking here in Arizona? And why do I put the Palace up there in the Wishman? Well, people watch these movies just like tens of thousands of people on an annual basis come to Arizona to go to Tombstone or to Old Tucson. Millions go to the Grand Canyon. And millions used to go to Rawhide because it had that movie set just in Scottsdale, and you could go on a stage ride. And, Bob Bell the other day he's like, oh, Stuart, Old Tucson and Rawhide, there were such cliches for tourists. And I said, well, Bob, you're from here. I just step back and realize that, like people going to Disneyland, people came to Arizona for that lifetime experience that they've saved for. And many of them, millions of them over the last 100 years have come here because they were inspired by a film or television show. And they want to go to that location. They want to go there and stand at the Palace Bar and have a drink, where Steve McQueen was, or maybe Tom Mix was, or the legend has it, Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. How the West was won. You know what? This is how Arizona helped win the West over the world. It was through our filmmakers. It was one of the ways, along with our novelists and our historians and our very own Sharlot Hall, and deciding to stake her claim here and say, this is important. This, as whether she was trying to reach people through her poetry or her essays, she found a permanent place to keep that mission of telling our story alive. Gene Autry, the only man or woman to have 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His impact is as strong. Maybe I'd put him side by side with Buffalo Bill. You put Tom Mix right there in the middle. But Gene Autry's, his understanding the moment and the medium, like Buffalo Bill Cody, timeless. Songs, production, filmmaking, entertaining, rodeo company. I can go on and on. He really was the reincarnated Buffalo Bill. Going down our own road in Prescott filmmaking, this is where we're at. I want to share some stats with you before I answer some questions. So, Let me share with you a little report from the U.S. film industry. The film and television industry supports a dynamic economy, employing people in every state across a diversity of skills and trades. In all, 2.32 million people, from special effects to makeup artists to writers to set builders, ticketators, and more, are in an industry that pays over $229 billion in wages annually. When a movie or television show shoots on location, it brings jobs, revenue, and related infrastructure development, providing an immediate boost to the local economy. The film industry pays out, film and television pays out $21 billion per year to more than 194,000 businesses, cities, and towns across the United States. The industry is comprised of over more than 122,000 businesses, 92% of which employ less than 10 people. In the last year, Tucson averaged $20 million a year in filmmaking receipts. Phoenix, last year, $29 million. Prescott, $200,000. In New Mexico, last year, 2024, $746 million in receipts. So far this year, $323 million have been injected into the economy and spent in New Mexico. Since 2020, between 2020 and 2023, New Mexico grossed $3.8 billion to their economy through filmmaking and television. Right? We used to be New Mexico. Right? I'll tell you, I know one year it changed. In the mid-1980s, my dad got a call from Ken Craven, who was making Gambler 3. And he said, Jeb, I need you to come to Santa Fe. They'd made Gambler 2 in Arizona, in old Tucson. Dad flew to Santa Fe, helped rewrite Gambler 3. He later wrote Gambler 4, but it was filmed in Santa Fe in the mid-1980s. What does Santa Fe have? Santa Fe has a little airport. It has a very welcoming tax credit program. It has a very artistic community. It's like Sedona, beautiful homes, beautiful locations, access to the national forests, great locations. And so what's happened since the mid-1980s to the present is that Arizona has been lapped by our neighbor in New Mexico. Now, New Mexico's been in the film business just as long as Arizona, but the University of New Mexico has become one of the top filmmaking training centers for students in the country. Albuquerque now has, and Santa Fe and Las Vegas, New Mexico, have one of the best homegrown groups of young people or new residents who have moved there who can accrue all the films. So from Los Angeles, you can bring your producers, your directors, your A-level actors, but now New Mexico has a homegrown film crews. And they have large tax incentives and film incentives to bring people to New Mexico to bring their films and their television series and their streaming to New Mexico. And why is that important? Well, people now flock not only to Buffalo, Wyoming, but to Las Vegas, New Mexico for Longmire film series. They have Breaking Bad, film conventions in New Mexico. People want to go there and see those film locations. Will Arizona it's going to take a long time for Arizona to reclaim its heritage in popular Western culture through filmmaking and television and streaming. But if we remain competitive, if we keep our eyes and ears open, our hearts open, and realize that the film companies are not coming to Prescott or Arizona to change us. They're coming here because it's good for business. And if it's good for business, they're going to come here. And it's good for us. And this is, I know, a little bit of an editorial, but I know that Junior Bonner, and from talking to Bill Pierce when he was the Film Commission, millions of dollars were left in the pockets of local businesses here in Prescott. Money that was not calculated to help their hotels and their restaurants and their businesses thrive. So it's my hope and dream that we here in Prescott will embrace the young men and women, and there's lots of good things happening in the background. I'm not the one to announce it, but I know that people are negotiating to build a studio here in Prescott, a multi-use site that can benefit youth and college students and filmmakers that could come here to Prescott and bring back our filmmaking and television industry to Prescott, Arizona. I'd love to ask questions. You're a great audience, and it's great to be here today. Love to answer any of your questions you might have.